Hello, everybody. This is Luna calling out to all of those of us on a long journey who have found themselves with a second wind to carry them along on this long journey through philosophy. And also, I think we should shout out, we've got a bunch of students graduating this.
That's right, a fresh crop from the philosophy program at the American University of Paris.
Who have reached the end of a certain leg of their philosophical journey, only to be scattered into the winds and continue onwards, right?
They've emerged from a terrifying ordeal,
Yeah.
for which we share a little responsibility.
We are partially responsible for the cause of their current distress, but at the same time also, responsible for the passion that is philosophy. I don't know. Sometimes I get nice emails of students saying that, you've really inspired me to continue philosophy,
That's right. We're also waving flags at the finish line.
Yeah.
Cheering them on.
So, as usual, my name's Val.
I'm Ol.
And this week's Luna is Let Us Name All. So we started a new book last week, Ol. Is that correct?
We did. Spinoza's Ethics.
And this one's a bit of a tricky one, I've got to admit. I was having a chat with Luna before, and she found it a little bit complicated.
Well, you'd think it's entitled The Ethics. You'd think you'd get a guide about how to do good things, how to avoid doing bad things.
Living the good life.
That's right.
How to treat your friends.
What is happiness?
Yep. Instead, all I got confronted with was a bunch of definitions and axioms and scholiums and corollaries.
It's so abstract.
It's so weird. All about God.
Yeah, but you know what? A little bird told me that there's like a tricky little way you can take a kind of hidden pathway around all the difficulties.
What? Are you telling me that are you trying to take shortcuts when reading Spinoza?
I'll take any help I can get when it comes to difficult philosophy. And thankfully, some older and wiser friends told me that you've got to go straight to the appendix to book one.
What, so you're jumping over all of the groundwork that Spinoza so carefully he puts in front of us. He says, I'm going to demonstrate this in geometric order. You're going to have to follow it through step by step. And here you are being like, I'm just going to skip to the back.
Look, I'm in the middle of book one. I got completely dizzy. I can't extricate myself from it. But what I can do is go back and get some context. And that's what the appendix gives us. It gives us context for his project in book one.
Yeah. Okay. So he's going to be saying, he's basically going to be summarizing. Here's what I reckon I achieved throughout this book.
Yeah, but he kind of puts it in a completely different way. He kind of says, in other words, and then gives you an entirely different perspective on what he was actually doing. Right. So the appendix is basically critical. He's basically saying, here are all these other philosophers and the way they talk about God and the universe and nature. I am not going to be doing that.
I've been, people accuse me of following in the footsteps of others, but here is my line of demarcation. I'm deliminating? Yeah, myself from my forebearers, my predecessors, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what does he do in book one? Well, we know that book one is all about nature and it's also about God. So we start at the largest, the highest, the ultimate kind of level in a way.
The maximum size, right? The biggest thing possible.
Exactly. It's kind of the opposite of Descartes, because Descartes kind of starts in his cozy little cottage and then basically narrows things down to just his mind.
The journey into the interiority of the self, which he then uses to reconstruct the universe with, right? Spinoza does the exact opposite.
Exactly. He's got the universe.
Yeah.
That's what's so amazing about the beginning.
He starts with everything. Not the most minimal unit, but he starts with the most maximal. And this is what I find is so disorienting about trying to read book one.
Yeah. And Spinoza knows that you're disorientated, Val.
Yeah.
He's got you covered. He anticipated this.
He goes, look, I'll just run you through what is different about what is particular to my method, what are the different conclusions that I've made, and why am I doing this in the first place?
Exactly. He says, Val, I know there are obstacles to you understanding what I'm doing in book one, right? Yeah. And basically, these are the prejudices that are stopping you from grasping, are you ready, the interconnection of all things.
Is he trying to accuse me of being prejudiced against certain ideas? I'm an open, free thinker. I'm wheeling and dealing around the Netherlands. The most open, free thinking state, and he's accusing me of being prejudiced and having certain preconceived ideas.
Well, he's doing nothing more than Descartes did, which is basically saying if you went to school, if you grew up in a culture, if you listened to any of your elders, then you've got an inchoate mass of absolutely inconsistent, contradictory rubbish swirling around in your mind.
And we need to start doing the triage and sorting through what these ideas are. And we're going to start with the biggest idea, the preconceptions we have about the biggest idea possible, God.
That's right. Time to call the cleaners, Val.
Yep.
Time to call the street cleaners, get the cachet out, get the high pressure hose out.
Yep. We're cleaning the mind of all of your preconceived notions about God. Because what are people saying about God?
They're saying all kinds of things. But you know what Spinoza's going to do? And I think this is like, for all of those, like, if any of you says, my God, what are you listening to a podcast on philosophy for? What's philosophy?
Yep.
Here's a beautiful definition that Spinoza gives us.
Oh, yes.
What does the philosopher do? The philosopher summons prejudice to the court of reason.
Whoa. That's such a good quote, because if listeners remember from last week, Spinoza is no stranger to the courthouse, being being presented before the law. He's been condemned in various respects. He's get excommunicated by his own Jewish community, right? He's no stranger to being summoned before the court.
But there's a difference, Val.
There's a key difference.
He's the judge and he's the prosecutor all in one.
Judge, jury, executioner, Spinoza. He's a Judge Dredd of, I suppose, the 1600s,
yeah.
17th century, 1600s. I always get that one mixed up.
So how does the trial start out? He's going to summon, he says, there are so many prejudices that we're beset by.
Yeah.
And there are so many obstacles blocking readers from understanding the brilliance and the truth of his exposition of the absolute in Book 1. Yeah. But he says, actually, all of these prejudices and obstacles are all summed up in one chief prejudice.
The prejudice of teleology, if I am not mistaken, right?
That's a fancy word you're using there.
Oh, teleology. We should know this from... all of our listeners have clearly read Aristotle. We should all know what teleology is. The ends. The ends to which all things strive. Their purpose. Their purpose, To what end does something serve?
So, that's teleology, right? So a television is the end to which my vision serves.
Exactly. Telescope, same thing.
Seeing towards an end. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So, this is it. He basically says, and there's a kind of everyday way he puts this as well. He says the main prejudice, this principal prejudice that we have from which all our other prejudices flow and follow, is the supposition that all natural things act on account of an end, as people themselves do.
Yes, all things move towards their natural end.
They're all purpose-driven.
Yeah, everything has a defined purpose according to the essence of whatever that thing is. This table, the teleology is for me to put my equipment on and for me to put my things on.
Sounds like Wall Street on a bad day.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody busying about, trying to gain as much as they possibly can.
Yeah, but I mean, this sounds right to me. Everything in nature has a purpose. This chair has a purpose. The objects around me all serve particular purposes. For me, surely everything in nature should have a purpose.
Haven't you listened to Bob Dylan?
Clearly.
Things just blow in the wind sometimes. They just blow in the wind.
Yeah, sometimes times are changing.
Floaty. Why do things have to be driving towards an end all the time?
Yeah.
It's making me anxious even just reading this out.
Yeah. And so what Spinoza's saying is that this is our main misconception or preconception about God or nature, that God and nature is moving towards a particular end. Now, this has really kind of weird theological consequences as well, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, first of all, people say everything natural is driving towards an end, right? Yeah. And then they suppose that gods, him, herself, themselves, right? God themselves is actually trying to achieve an objective, trying to fulfill an aim, trying to realize a purpose.
Yes, and I mean the I suppose one of the easy ways to think about this is that the purpose of God is to show us towards a good life so that we may ascend to heaven at the end of our lives, right? That's a classic kind of like Christian teleological notion of God. God's purpose is to judge what is good and bad, and then we act according to that purpose so that we may ascend into heaven, right? That's a kind of teleological.
But Val, I mean, there are obviously clear problems with this entire framework because humanity acts up. Humanity doesn't do its job properly. Humanity turns away from God. There's sin
everywhere. That humanity turning away from God is the reason, according to the Bible, we get cast out from Eden, right?
What about all the locusts? What about the swarms of frogs? What about the black rain falling from the sky?
That's like, the Old Testament is just catastrophe after catastrophe, right? Like Job getting, stripped of all his possessions so that, God and the devil can play dice, or not play dice, but, they have your little bet.
Exactly. You can see how bad things are going to get. I mean, because you can say, like, if God actually did make humanity for a purpose, right?
Yeah.
And as Spinoza says, God created all other things so that they could serve human beings. So he created the vegetables, he created the fennel. I like fennel, by the way.
Yep.
Created apricots.
Yeah.
Created sea bream, sea bass as well for us to eat.
They're all for us. That means, everything in this is another kind of, theological idea that everything in creation was created to serve mankind or humanity. Right?
Yeah, but the problem is, basically he's setting out like a kind of a chain, right? So God creates animals as a means to an end, right? So there are enough animals. If they're edible, we catch them, kill them, burn them on a barbecue, stuff them in our gobs, right?
Yeah.
Humanity survives. Why does God need humanity? He needs to be worshipped, Val. He can't just be God on his own.
Well, he needs some recognition. What point's a God that doesn't get worshipped? Like the ancient Greek gods knew this very well. It's like if you don't provide the right sacrifices to us, then we're going to rain down calamities and catastrophes upon you.
Right, exactly. And you think that God was perfect. He didn't need recognition. But here you go. This is the traditional theological setup. Yeah. Every link in that chain could possibly be a weak link.
Yes.
Right? So you can look at certain natural things, certain animals, and just say, look, that's not particularly edible. Right? No. That average, the bush cocky, which I spent a lot of time trying to tame in my first year at university life, I can tell you.
Oh, yep.
The bush cocky, like how on earth does that help humanity to survive, the existence of that animal? Right? Yes. That's a weak link in the chain.
Yeah. And this weak link in the chain is what establishes a kind of hierarchy, right? So this is going back to, a very Aristotelian conception of nature, right? Nature is fundamentally uneven, unequal, according to your essence, it gets structured into a hierarchy, into a hierarchy. And Spinoza doesn't like this at all because it gives us a particular conception of God and a particular conception of the entire universe, right?
Absolutely. He's against all of this hierarchy.
Yeah.
And, you can have basically in the hierarchy, the end to which everything else aspires and drives is the highest in the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And as far down you can possibly go in the chains of means, right? You're going to be going lower down in the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically you're going down through all the vegetables that feed the animals that we eat. And then you go from the vegetables to all the minerals they extract from the soil. And it goes down and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, right?
Yeah.
It's all prejudice.
So these are all, prejudice from, is that a human prejudice? Is that some kind of idea that maybe we have created?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is what's so great about Spinoza. He's not just like, a hater on the internet just saying, oh, that's all rubbish.
No.
He's going to show us why it is that we come up with these prejudices in the first place. Right?
Yeah, and that's the first task that he's going to try. And that's the task that he is setting himself in the ethics and for his other works. He's trying to look at what are the origins of our prejudices, our superstitions, the things that prevent us from understanding the way that God or nature actually is. And he's going to demonstrate this kind of point by point.
Absolutely. This is task one. And basically he's showing that it's possible to have a science of error. Yes. We can develop a scientific analysis of the mechanism that leads human beings into these false beliefs about nature and God.
Yes. And so to do that, so he's going to have to do he's going to have to make a lot of kind of maneuvers, because he's going against an entire, theological apparatus, right? So it's going to be trying to create a science of error. Why it is that we fall into error? Why do we have these kind of misconceptions? The fundamental basis of this error, in his view, is that we have this preconception of a teleological view of God or nature, right? And he thinks that this is wrong. This creates a hierarchy, and this is one of the sources, maybe, if I dare say, the primordial source of our errors.
Absolutely. And that's task 2, showing that this teleological view of the universe, whereby everything is directed towards a purpose, a final cause, an end, he's going to show that's wrong.
Yeah.
And then finally, the third task, what's he going to do? He's going to make good on his earlier claim that all of our other prejudices are derived from that fundamental prejudice. And he's going to show that whenever we talk about things being good or bad, or we blame somebody for doing something wrong, or we praise somebody for doing something fantastic, whenever we see order, whenever we see confusion, whenever we say, oh my God, that bicycle is so beautiful, oh my God, that electric scooter is so deformed, right?
Yeah.
All of those, Val, those are prejudices.
They're all just value judgments.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he's almost saying, like, everyone's too relative with all of these notions. I'm going to try and cut a clear path through all the morass, right?
Yeah, and let me tell you, dear listeners, try and get through just one day of your life without using some of these prejudices: good, bad, beautiful, ugly. Somebody deserves good things to happen to them, somebody else doesn't. I mean, it's just basically, it's like the foundational bedrock of all gossip.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have any gossip whatsoever if you weren't able to make these kind of value judgments over what is good or bad. But yeah, so again, I feel like Spinoza, he's setting, much like Descartes, he's setting an incredibly high bar. And this is one of the things that I think is really difficult to orient yourself around when you are first reading him, is exactly, he's demanding something that is just, that goes against all your intuitive senses, right? Much like Descartes, Descartes says, cast away, doubt away all of the external world, everything you know through your sense perceptions, which is already an incredibly, it's a wild ask. Spinoza's doing a very similar thing, right? He says, cast away all of your prejudices. We're going to clear the ground, and we're going to get back to the real nature of things.
That's the promise. I mean, he will later on in books 3 and 4, scientifically address all of the obstacles that are going to make it very difficult for us to do this.
Yes.
Right. So he's not just going to say, like Descartes, oh, just use your free will. You've got free will, get on with it.
Oh no, Spinoza is far more thorough going into his investigations, as we'll see, into the different sources and reasons why we have these prejudices, why we experience things like joy, sadness. He has an incredible kind of taxonomy of all the different emotions and what combinations of things give rise to the different emotions. But anyway, we'll have to be patient and wait a little bit, right?
So let's get into this first task, Val. The first task is, as we said just before, showing why people have this prejudice and believe that everything is purpose-driven in nature.
So he's departing from a kind of the first premise that he's going to be using is that humans are born ignorant of the causes of things.
Yeah.
That's not, I don't know. I feel like I've got a pretty good understanding of the causal world around me.
You were a baby once, Val. Don't you remember?
No, I don't remember.
Exactly. You're ignorant of your own cause. That means, right? You just proved Spinoza right.
Oh man, here I was trying to throw a spanner in the wheels, and immediately disprove myself. So we're born ignorant of the causes. So he's just having a go at babies. Is that what he's trying to tell me?
Yeah, he's just saying these ignorant bastards, who do they think they are?
What do they know? They think they know stuff about they've got a pretty good sense of cause and effect. I cry, mother comes, mother feeds me or changes my diaper or whatever. That's
you're talking like 6 or 9 months before that happens, I can tell you. It's just like a bundle of urges at the beginning. So I mean, it doesn't. Let's leave the babies alone.
Okay.
I think that's a little unfair. Let's take your average university student,
Okay. Yep.
or your average middle-aged man, even worse.
Oh no.
I think we can say that, certain phenomena happen to us every day.
Yeah.
The wind. Remember your problem with the wind.
Yeah. I still don't know. You explained it to me, something about air pressure. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced.
Things are blowing in the wind, but we don't know why.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first premise. All humans are born ignorant of the causes of things. So phenomena happen all around them,
Yes.
but they don't know precisely why. They don't have scientific knowledge.
No.
Right?
We don't investigate into the causes of every single thing that happens around us. We couldn't. No, because there's a sense in which we go through our day and we just take things for granted, right? We don't investigate into the causes. I took the metro to get here. I don't know how the entire metro system works. I just go, train shows up at time and I use it. And the rest of the series of causes that go on to making that actually happen, I'm largely ignorant of, right?
Yeah, but this is a second premise. What were you doing in that blissful ignorance? You were seeking something useful to you, right?
Yes, and I was trying to work out, why it was useful to me. And I think about, I have to think about this, this particular, maybe the metro example is not the best one, but we are consciously seeking out and, things that are useful to us. It seems like a pretty...
Well, this is like a very early anticipation of what became like a dominant understanding of human behavior with classical economics after utilitarianism in the late 1700s. And Spinoza, along with Hobbes, is one of the early founders of this whole approach to human motivation. Yeah. He basically says all humans consciously seek what is useful to them. That's what we're doing all the time. We're looking for what is useful to us.
We seek the good.
Right.
Yes.
And the consequence of this, like the immediate consequence, is because we know that we're doing this, right? We think we're free. I believe that I am free, Val. Right?
Yeah.
Not because I can fly, right? Not because I'm Superman, but simply because I'm conscious of having wishes, right? Yeah. And I'm completely ignorant as to how it is that I have these very particular wishes.
Ah, yes.
Right? So I was dreaming of egg, bacon, spinach, and avocado with Tabasco sauce in a wrap.
Yep.
On the way in, right? Yes. And I don't know why I was dreaming of those things, but I felt free because I desired the breakfast wrap.
Well, I feel like as your unofficial psychoanalyst, I can actually provide you the cause of that dream is that's something that we often eat after we've finished recording these podcasts in the AMX
but
university.
Why do I always eat it? This is the problem. I had one colleague said, "Watch your cholesterol with all that bacon."
Yes. But yes, that is the question. Why is it in the first place that out of all of the things that were presented before me, I consistently choose that one? Because we often just don't even think about why it is that we have a certain preference for this thing or another thing, right? We've never really investigated a lot of the reasons behind why we choose one thing or another. But one thing that we do kind of spontaneously think is that I am making a free choice.
Yeah. And in doing that, because we're seeking what is useful, another way of putting that is that we're consciously seeking to fulfill a purpose. We're trying to realize an objective, an aim, and a goal, right? Yeah. And so what are we doing? We are conscious of ourselves being goal-driven, right? Yeah. That's just part of our everyday experience, okay?
It's my entire self-identity. I'm goals-driven all the time. I'm always thinking about the next project, what's the next thing that I'm going to be doing, where I'm going to be in 5 years. That's just me 24/7.
That's right.
I'm always grinding, thinking about my goals.
Yeah, and Spinoza knows this about you, Val, right? Yeah. And he basically says that when you see something like a bee floating around, right, or a bush cocky scurrying out of a compost heap that's been badly managed, right, you say to yourself, what's he after? What's he doing? What's he going for?
Yeah.
Why is he doing that?
What is he? Where is he off to? What business does he have? Scuttling around.
Yeah. You think there's something there. There's like a natural phenomenon. Yeah. You're ignorant of its causes. Yeah. So what do? Being a typical human, You project your own mechanism
Yes.
onto the foreign, unknown, obscure thing.
I start attributing it ends and reasons and causes as to why I begin speculating as to why it might be doing that using my own frame of reference.
This is why it is a prejudice, because you are prejudging that poor animal, Val.
Yeah. I'm attributing it reasons that it made, I don't know what's going on in its head. I can't tell,
That bee was just being one with the universe.
Yeah, it was just going about, and then I attributed it a cause and a reason in a hierarchy.
That's so heavy.
And I put it beneath myself because I'm an object of a larger size, like this is what Spinoza's trying to get at.
That bee's going to sting you. It's going to get its revenge.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, 100%. So, okay. So we're going about living in ignorance, thinking that we're free. We don't really know what the causes are. We're kind of we have a spontaneous orientation in the world where we're kind of like trying to, go towards things that are useful to us. If we don't understand the reason why something's happening, we just project a reason onto it without actually investigating.
Exactly. And he adds a third premise here, which is that here we are, we're just like wandering through the garden of the universe, and suddenly we find things around us that are useful, right? We find things in our bodies, so think, oh my God, these nails are actually quite useful.
Yep, scratching my back,
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Itches, I can scratch, right?
Yep.
My eyes, they see, my teeth can chew, and my God, I really like this fish. I think I'm going to eat this fish, right?
My hands can write philosophy.
Exactly. And so we suddenly say, right, well, everything natural must be there in order to suit us.
Yeah.
We are the kings of the universe.
We are the Alpha and the Omega, right? So again, this is classical theology that he's trying to go against. Human being as the center of the universe. Everything in creation was created for us and our benefit.
Sounds like a huge ego trip, right?
It is.
But there's a catch. So Spinoza, it's not just like pure critique. He's not just bad-mouthing humanity, because he says that humans are quite aware of the fact that all these useful things that exist outside them and that suit them and are appropriate for their needs, humans do recognize and do admit that they didn't create those things themselves.
Yeah.
Right? Humans do make things,
yeah.
right? That's part of being driven by purpose, right?
Yes.
But they know they didn't make the fish.
No.
Right? So they say, another big projection, they say there must be some governor of nature that freely makes things for us.
This is reminding me of a certain somebody that Luna has recently abandoned back in The Hague. This sounds like Descartes.
That's right.
Descartes and his author God, right? Like Descartes' idea is, God is the perpetual author of everything in existence. Does he say that God made everything in existence for my benefit? Not necessarily, but there's still this idea that there is an external creator of all things that is somehow separate from creation.
And there's this odd oscillation between this projection of this governor of nature. That governor is seen in a position of mastery because it created all things, right? Yep. And at the same time, it's a little bit weird because this governor is also in the position of a waiter in a restaurant, because when you need something, this waiter comes along and goes, "What would you like, sir?
Yeah.
What would you like, madam?
Oh, I heard your prayers.
Yeah.
What can I get for you?
Would you like duck à l'orange?"
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of the other things that there is a kind of projection. We kind of go, okay, so there must be a creator for these things around me. I didn't create the fish. Somebody must have created the fish. If we go back to Descartes, I'm just thinking one of the things that I suppose always bothered me a little bit in his conception of the author God, and this is what I view as Descartes' projection, is that Descartes says, yeah, but God is good. God would never do anything evil. God would never deceive me. God is good. And this is the way in which we can understand Spinoza saying that we project things onto, we have this idea of a creator God and author God, but we can project some of our prejudices into that conception of God. And Descartes does exactly that. He goes, well, God can't lack anything. He must be good, therefore my God is good. And that's an example of a kind of prejudice that one may project onto this kind of creator God of some description.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because what Spinoza points out is that we also project things onto God that are all too human.
Yes.
Because he shows that God, in creating all of these natural things that are useful for human beings, right?
Yes.
Being the master and then also serving human beings, he did this in a very self-interested way.
Yeah.
Right? He did this to put humanity into his debt. He's like a mafia boss.
Oh.
Does you an enormous favor that you didn't even ask for.
Yep.
Right? And then you're going to be in the boss's debt.
Yep.
Right? And sooner or later he's going to come calling and say, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. And you're going to have to do that favor.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of, one of the iterations of Catholicism, right? You were born in sin. You were born with a debt. And, you need to, by your good actions, you can earn your way into heaven. Well, maybe earn your way is not exactly the right, but by your good deeds, you can pay off this debt that will allow you to get into the kingdom of heaven, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah. And he actually says that. So he says, why does God benefit humans by creating all these useful natural things for them to eat, right?
Yeah.
He says, in order to, I quote, bind men to them and to be held by them in highest honor.
Yeah.
Right. So God wants to bind human beings to himself and to be held in honor. And then the consequence, right, is that human beings, once they've projected this master of the universe, right, they invent different ways of worshipping and pleasing God, right?
Yes.
Because like you said, they're trying to pay off that debt, right? So that God will continue to do good things for them, like bring it about that there's a good harvest, for example.
But I mean, we should be very clear at this point in the conversation as well. Spinoza is not against the idea of God. He's just against a particular conception of God, one that is born out of our own prejudices. Of course, book 1 of the Ethics is he's going to be explaining, here is my understanding of what God is, right? It's what he's doing here is a critique of a particular anthropomorphic God, a human God that is separate from creation. This is the God that he is critiquing, right? It's not the idea of God, tout court or whatever. Like, he has a different conception. He's just laying out what are the dangers of having this kind of separate creator God idea. Yeah,
and there's a massive danger which we all know very well.
Yeah.
It's called the problem of evil. I distinctly remember making a scripture teacher cry by coming up with it when I was 13 years old with a bunch of friends, and we got chucked out of the class actually for doing that.
Yeah, not much has changed.
Well, she couldn't give me a decent answer to the problem of evil.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, and this is something that Spinoza brings up. He says, look, those people who have this teleological vision of the universe, right? They're trying to show that nothing that nature does is in vain, right? So everything has a purpose that's natural, right? But all they succeed in doing is showing that nature is just as mad as human beings are.
Yes.
Because look at earthquakes, look at volcanoes, look at floods, look at tsunamis, look at plagues, look at the hantavirus. Who put the hantavirus there? What's the point of that? All those poor people on a cruise ship and that woman in hospital Bichat, very close to where you live, by the way. I thought I'd warn you about that.
Oh, you should. Thank you. I was not aware of this. So there's a new virus going about town, is there?
That's right, going about Paris.
Yeah.
Well, and hopefully it's confined in that negative pressure hospital room just a kilometre north of where you live.
We've all heard that one before. And then we were locked inside for 2 years. Okay, so, so we have this idea of God that, so the problem of evil is if you say that everything in the natural world has a purpose and that God created this natural world, then God also has to be the author of everything that evil that has ever occurred in the world, right?
Yeah, but the believers have an answer for that one, Val.
Oh, okay.
They've got you.
Yep.
They've got you. Do you know why that earthquake erupted?
To teach me a lesson about how to be a good person.
Do you know why that victim of hantavirus is residing just a kilometre from where you live?
I think I don't know. I'm often I'm very Leibnizian about these things sometimes.
You don't know.
I think it's just because we live in the best of all possible worlds, and so it could have been much worse. That's my answer.
It is already pretty bad. God is angry at you, Val.
That's okay.
This is what the believers say. Like, if a natural disaster happens, it's
Yeah.
a sign, it's an expression of God's anger.
Yeah.
That's basically the Old Testament.
Yeah.
God is throwing a tantrum all the way through the Old Testament.
Okay, and so God is angry. I've done something wrong. Therefore, I need to placate God by either changing my behavior, not offering a sacrifice. That's a bit too pagan and ancient Greek mythology, Norse. But
You could say some prayers.
I could say some prayers. I could go
Get down on your knees.
I could go to confession. I have to pay off the debt, right? Something bad has happened because God is angry at me or humanity. So we got to change our behavior.
Yeah, but watch out.
Yes.
Spinoza's got a counter.
Oh yeah.
All right, the theists have thrown a punch. He's throwing a counter punch. He's
Yep.
saying, this is ridiculous. You're going on about natural disasters as an expression of God's anger because we haven't behaved correctly. What about all of those angelic young children who live in the 18th arrondissement like you?
Yeah.
What did they do to deserve this proximity of the hantavirus victim?
Well, I mean, it's the collective sin of humanity, right? We're all responsible. It's all of our fault.
Now we're going to go into unbaptized babies being thrown into purgatory.
Exactly.
This is ridiculous.
There's no one is innocent.
Yeah. Spinoza basically says, look, disasters befall the pious and the impious alike. Your worshipping makes no difference in the end.
Yep.
Nowadays, we would say it's purely statistical,
Yeah.
right? And so no one is favoured in the long run.
Yeah.
And basically what he's doing here, I mean, I like this point because basically what he's trying to do is he's trying to neutralise a point of extreme religious controversy and conflict in the 17th century.
Yeah.
Because remember, Europe had just gone into a 30-year war
Yeah.
that devastated Elizabeth's life.
Yeah.
Over the difference in between Catholicism and Protestantism.
Yes.
And part of the war was about religious dogma, and it was about differences in how you worship gods.
Yes, and Spinoza is trying to create a sort of unity, and all of these differences in religious dogmas are based on the fact that these religions have a teleological conception of God, but they think the teleology goes in different directions, right?
Exactly.
Spinoza's trying to equalize an uneven playing field. Actually, it just reminded me of when you were talking about, what about all the other innocents in the 18th arrondissement? I remember my uncle told me the story of when he was in primary school. This was in Brisbane back in the 60s, and he went to a Catholic school, and so it was taught by nuns, and often what the nuns would do is that whenever one kid was playing up, the nuns would punish the entire class.
Oh no.
And so one time my uncle, he very foolishly puts his hand up because he was a troublemaker, so he is constantly getting rapped on the knuckles, beaten, whatever. But one time he put his hand up to protest, and he says, I didn't do anything, I'm innocent, why do I have to get punished for the actions of somebody else? And the nun said to him, the innocent must suffer with the guilty.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
What a line!
Yeah, and that's a kind of Catholic position in some respects. It's like disasters befall all of mankind rather than it being concentrated on the people doing wrong, right? So this is
one of his points. Like, from the position of prejudice, and it's a tough battle of reason against prejudice because prejudice always has a response. At this point, if you actually said, why should the innocent always suffer with the guilty, maybe the nuns would have gone into the story of Adam and Eve, right? Or they could have said, don't question the mysterious ways of God.
Yes, exactly.
This is the law.
There is a divine plan. God has a plan for everything, and who are you, little puny human, to question what that plan is?
Exactly.
Who are you to question the distribution of good and evil? God has a place for all of it. We're just ignorant of it. We just don't know what it is.
Yeah, and Spinoza is very, very clear on this point. Yeah. He basically says, you are just taking shelter behind ignorance when you say that. All you are saying in a fancy way is, you don't know.
Yeah.
Right? And for him, as one of the great founders of the Enlightenment, that is completely unacceptable.
No. your ignorance is not an argument, as a certain Karl Marx once said, right?
Exactly.
You cannot, and this is the thing, you are projecting your ignorance onto the world. You are trying to give causes to things you don't actually, you haven't investigated, you don't understand. You're just using your prejudices and you're projecting them upon the world, right? What Spinoza wants to do is, no, we can actually investigate into the causes and the reasons of things. Right. Why does this occur? Why do bad things happen? Why do I feel this way? Why did this thing make me feel sad? Why did this make me happy? There's a mode of investigation that is going to be the driving force of the entire ethics.
Exactly. Yeah. And so with this first task that he's been carrying out in the appendix to book 1, we've seen this kind of battle play out, this boxing match in between the theist and the rationalist, and they've been going at each other. And the theist, the religious person, in the end just basically says, don't question the mysterious ways of God.
Yeah.
And Spinoza says, that's really weak. You're just taking refuge in ignorance. Yeah. And the religious person will just repeat again the position, don't question the mysterious ways of God, right? Yeah. And Spinoza knows that there's going to be a kind of a deadlock here between the philosopher and the theist, the believer, right? And so he mentioned, this is the famous bit in the Ethics where he actually says, humanity would have been doomed to millennia of such prejudice had it not been for one fantastic discovery.
What possible discovery? What could have that been?
Geometry and mathematics.
Just when I thought I'd gotten away. It just Euclid is back, right?
That's right. For all of those, learning your trig, your what is it, Sophocles or whatever, the cosintan. Yeah.
That's the nature of the
Sokota. That's what it is. That's the way you memorize them. Yeah.
That's the nature of the universe. You investigate that, you've got a perfect. Okay, so Spinoza says that this is. Oh, actually, sorry. I just wanted before we go back, like this debate between the philosopher and the theist is that there's a very kind of odd argument that the theist is putting forward, right? When you say it's all just part of God's plan, don't question it. For Spinoza, what you're effectively saying is don't try and understand God.
Yes.
Don't try and know anything about God. You have no relationship to God. God is cut off. It's out there. There's some plan. Don't question it. Just go along with it. Spinoza says, but you've cut me off from God there.
Exactly. Yeah. You've put a barrier up. You've put a fence up where, in fact, we could start investigating things.
Yes. It's the barrier of your own ignorance, is cutting humanity off from its relationship to God that we're going to be seeing throughout the ethics.
But mathematics shows us another way.
Yes.
Because you can't argue with mathematics.
No.
Mathematics is not an opinion.
No. It's universally valid for all of those who are engaged in it. Yeah. Well, even if you are ignorant of it or not, triangle's triangle. You can't have a square triangle or a circular triangle. That's the case for everyone.
Mathematicians do argue, but they don't actually argue about the discipline itself or its findings. They argue about who was first to make a particular discovery.
Yes.
And who's come up with the most elegant way of coming up with a proof, for example.
Yes, of course.
So, second task. Nature has no purpose.
Okay, so he's just gone, all right, you've all attributed nature a purpose, a teleology, an end. I need to establish, I have already established through this first part of the book, that nature has no purpose. You cannot attribute to nature an end or a telos.
So here he goes pretty quickly. He just basically says, look, I'm sorry, but you do have to read book 1.
Yeah.
I have shown there that infinite things follow necessarily from the nature of God and not from any supposed free will that picks out purposes.
No.
You've just got this continual proliferation, this infinite mushrooming of creation and of things that follow from the nature of the universe.
Yeah, creation is always happening out there. It doesn't have a particular orientation or end. Creation nature and God just is everything.
It's just continually spilling over any kinds of limits.
Yeah.
It's basically one big mess.
Yeah.
The saucepans have boiled over completely.
Yeah. And this is the infinite. This is what's so disorienting about trying to think, the infinite is that it just keeps going. It's, and this is why, Spinoza just throws us out into everything in the world. He doesn't start with the minimal subject as Descartes does. He goes, let's try and consider everything all at once.
Yeah.
And this everything doesn't have a purpose, because the moment you start trying to assign it a particular purpose, you're projecting your ignorance onto it, right? We need to have a different orientation towards it.
Exactly. You're limiting it.
Yeah.
So he basically points us towards, he says, you're going to have to go back to book 1 to find out, to find my full argument for why this is false, this idea that nature has a purpose. I can show you a different way that nature works, right? But he does give us, what he does do is he gives us 3 further problems that he has with teleology, with this idea that nature is driven by a purpose.
Yeah.
And his first one is he says, look, basically you're getting things upside down.
Yeah.
Right? Because what you're doing is you're taking something that is actually a cause, right?
Yeah.
So you have a change in the chemical composition of the soil because, certain types of fertilizer have been used. There's been it's monocultural agriculture. The soil has got completely exhausted, right? And you have a bad harvest and you don't have the same amount of wheat that turns up, in August. And basically he's saying, you think that God is punishing humanity by a bad harvest because they didn't go to church on a Sunday enough, right? And what you've done there, right, is you've taken what was the actual cause, the soil fertility problem, the exhaustion of the soil, and you've turned it into a means for a later end, which is God having to punish human beings to slap human beings back into line, right? And so things are getting topsy-turvy. Right?
Yeah, you're making a mistake in the order of things, right? In the order of nature. And in particular, one of the things that he's going to be stressing in book 1, and this is why we're going to have to go back and go through it in more detail, is that we continually confuse causes and effects.
Yes.
We take as effects, we think that effects are causes, whereas, in the example you just gave, or the absence of a cause means that we have to create an effect. We have to say, I can't explain I can't explain the change in the soil fertility. I'm going to have to invent a different cause because I haven't taken the time to actually investigate what the real causes of things are.
Yeah. So say you're Aristotle. Basically, Aristotle says that purposes or objectives are final causes.
Yes.
Right? So with the example I was using, Aristotle would say slapping humans back into line was the cause that the soil fertility diminished.
Yes.
Right?
So God punishing us. Yes.
Yeah. So God manages to slap us into line end of August, September, when we suddenly go, oh my God, there's no harvest. We're going to starve to death
over the winter. Yep.
Yeah. He says that's the cause of something that happened back in the spring earlier.
Oh.
Right. Which is just a means. And so that's an effect of God's plan, right? Because God has the plan. I want to slap humanity into line. So I've got to think backwards. And now I have to actually cause the soil fertility to go downhill back in the spring, right? And so that's why the cause is happening later on in time, chronologically, to the actual effect, which is the soil fertility decreasing, which happens earlier in time. So that's what Spinoza means by it being upside down. Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the chain of cause, that's actually just a total reversal. We've just been thinking about things back to front this entire time.
Exactly, and we do that because obviously, when we if we're instrumentalized and if we're organized, we also back plan in a way. You think, I want to buy a new bike. I better either steal my neighbor's bike or save up enough money to actually buy the bike. And then you think, how do I save up money? Blah, blah, blah. And you go back, you plan backward. It's retroactive, right?
Okay, yeah. So it's kind of retroactive. Again, so it's kind of, it makes sense what Aristotle's saying, because in a certain sense, it's our intuitive way of understanding the world.
That's how we do things, right? Yeah. But Spinoza is just basically saying only human beings, all right? And only human beings who haven't read my book as well. Right?
But so we need to turn it all around to get us back on the right track.
Yeah. Now, second problem, Val. You ready for this one?
Okay. What have we got?
Why God's perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Obviously, not lacking in anything. I remember my Descartes.
Right. So why would he go about creating anything? If he's got it all, if he's perfect, what on earth could motivate God to create something, because what that implies is that he was missing something and he needed to make it for himself. It's like me with my breakfast wrap.
Yes.
Right? I need to make it. I'm lacking it. My stomach is crying out for it.
Yes.
Right?
How could you possibly desire something that you are already in possession of? Right? This is the great moment in one of the great moments in Plato's Symposium, right, where they do a dialogue over this exact question of, is love beautiful? And then Socrates does this whole thing where he says, but why would the goddess of love need to acquire something that she already has, right? So it's this question of desire. If you actually think that God is perfect, why would God need to create something separate?
That's right.
God cannot be lacking, but also in a different sense to the way that Descartes is talking about it.
So, I mean, he actually, and the third problem is just basically he goes back to what he was talking about earlier. He was saying, when people analyze events that happen, they say, oh, the tile fell off the roof and killed somebody because the wind was blowing. Why was the wind blowing? I say low and high pressure systems.
Yeah.
And somebody says, well, why were there high and low pressure systems that caused the wind to blow and the tile to fall off and kill the man?
Yeah.
Right? And then you explain, they ask more questions. And in the end, you're forced to say, it's the will of God.
Yeah.
Right? And he says, when you analyze any mechanical series of causes far enough, because of this kind of perspective error whereby you're just looking at it from the end of a great chain of causes, it looks improbable. Yes. You're going to say, why is it that Tom was killed by this tile falling off the roof, right?
Yeah.
Or Harry or whoever, right? Yeah. Why were they killed by this tile? So many things had to fall into place in order for it to happen, right? Yeah. But that's the perspectival error.
And a seemingly infinite number of things had to have all occurred in this particular configuration so that this particular event could have occurred, right? And this is what becomes so dizzying. There's a certain exhaustion when you're trying to explain a causal chain where I can empathize, right? I kind of go, it's like when a child asks you why, or like to go, I don't want to make fun of babies and children, but there's something but there's something, I think it illustrates this really good, really well. Any of us who have ever interacted with a child and they want to understand why something is the case, we all have probably experienced a scenario where they keep going, yeah, but why? Why did that happen? Why did this happen? And and at a certain point, you give up and you go, that's just the way that it is.
But if you don't, and this is the point he wants to sneak in here.
Yes.
If you are a scholar, if you are a scientist, after the style of the new science that Descartes and Spinoza are trying to promote, you're not going to give up.
No.
You're going to continue. You're going to continue scientific investigation into mechanical causes.
Yes.
And the mob are going to see you, Val,
yeah.
and they're going to take you for a heretic. They're going to see you as impious, and they're going to proclaim you to be a heretic. And they're going to tell on you, and they're going to tell the priests about you, and you're going to get excommunicated.
Again, Spinoza's already excommunicated. He's asking for it again.
It's terrible, this mechanism.
Right? It is terrible.
So, task 3. Right?
Task
These
3?
derived prejudices.
Okay.
So he says, look, humans consider that all natural things have been made for them.
Yeah.
And then when they're considering these things and looking at these things, they single out one salient property in that thing that makes them useful. Yep. Right? There's something that stands out about the rose where I think this was made for me to savor the beauty of the universe, this particular smell of the rose, the beauty of the petals and so on.
Yes.
Right?
This was made for me to cut, to give to my love,
Exactly.
It was fate. It was fate. This was here at the right moment, ready for me to pluck and give to somebody that I care about.
You're giving a set of steak knives to your partner.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a nice Valentine's gift.
Yeah, that's always, It's useful, it's practical.
And he says, this is how we form notions by which we think we explain the nature of things. Notions like good, bad, order, confusion, hot, cold, beauty and ugliness.
Yeah.
But these are the notions, Val, that drove Plato crazy in the first place, right? Because he says, we always think that we know things when we say they're a mess or they're in order or they're good or they're bad.
Yep.
But all of these notions are relative.
Yeah.
Right? Because what you call bad, I'll call good.
Yeah.
What my son thinks is an ordered room, I'll see as complete bomb crater.
Absolute chaos.
Right? And so all these concepts are relative to our perceptual apparatus, our cultural upbringing, etc., right? And he says that it's because human beings consider themselves to be free in how they desire and act that they also use these other notions of praise and merit and wrongdoing, and they engage in blaming and shaming.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, it's all part of the education of the next generation. You know, if you want your prejudices to continue, you have to be able to tell them, you know, this is what's good, this is what's bad. You know, like if you want to perpetuate your own worldview, you need to be able to say to, you know, the next generation, that's good, that's bad. But this is not what Spinoza wants us to be doing, right? We have this problem because we consider ourselves to be free. You know, there's a problem of this kind of like relativization. Everyone thinks they're free. It's like, well, you know, how can one person say that this is good or beautiful and another person say this is ugly?
That's right. Yeah. Now, for this next one, let's take a good, solid Australian example. I want to talk about ticks.
Oh, yep. Okay.
Many of our listeners will be familiar with these, right?
Yep.
And my kids are certainly going to risk their fair harvest of ticks when they go out in their scout camps in France. Let's say we're trying to understand the tick, right?
Okay.
And so what happens? He says, look, normally humans imagine things and they think that they're actually understanding it when they're imagining it, but basically they're still living in a fantasy bubble. Because how does this work? Well, our imagination is affected by the senses, right? So what do we see of the tick? We just see this nasty little bump protruding out of our lower calf or something, right? We just see this black little body. We can't even see the head of the tick because the head of the tick is burrowed into our skin.
Yes.
There's a kind of a red welt around it.
Yes.
And so our imagination is affected very selectively. Yeah. Do we know, Val, the sensation of pure bliss that tick is experiencing drinking our blood?
No, I mean, I can only imagine it would be like for the human being to be continually just, you know, IV dripped up to a bottle of red wine or something like that, or just guzzling it down.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, this tick had a terrible winter. Yeah. He's having the time of his life.
Yeah. Who am I? Who am I to extract this poor tick from the state of absolute bliss that it is currently experiencing?
Yeah, you're just like basically crying because you've got a red welt on your and you think you've got Lyme's disease. You're about to contract Lyme's disease.
Exactly.
Right?
Suck it up.
And Spinoza says these human beings, their imagination always focuses on things that are easy to imagine. So you're just thinking, poor me, I'm a victim of the tick.
It's very self-centered. It's kind of just like, you know, what about my well-being? You know, you're not thinking about the collective experience.
Exactly. And so, beautiful quotes. Spinoza loves to talk about the ignorant.
Yes.
I always feel that he catches me out when I read this. Am I the ignorant?
Yes, I can tell you that you and I both.
Okay,
we're all
on the same
ignorant.
boat.
Yes.
Yeah. So he says, the ignorant say that something is good or bad, healthy or putrid or corrupt, in accordance with the way in which they are affected by it.
Okay.
Each person has judged about things in accordance with the disposition of her own brain, or rather, she has accepted the affections of her imagination as things.
So again, ignorance is just projecting your own prejudices onto the world around you to explain things
based on your very selective operation of your senses.
Yep.
Right.
Of your upbringing, you know, it's just you've kind of just divided up the world according to how I see it best or how I see it should be.
Exactly. When I look at the tick, I imagine one of my cats who disappeared, no doubt because of a tick.
Yep.
We're quite successful in getting ticks off that cat for a while, and then the cat just disappeared because we lived near the bush.
Yeah.
So here we are, and what's amazing about that little bit just there is he's basically anticipated all of book 2.
Yes.
Right. The whole account of how false knowledge, how error actually emerges from the habits of the imagination, from the operation of the senses. Everything that he will elaborate over about 30 pages in book 2, here he summarizes in a few lines.
Yeah.
So what happens as a result, Val?
There's going to be this movement that is going to take us out of our self-imposed ignorance, shall we say. Maybe I sound a bit too Kantian there, but he's going to be getting us to go through the causes of our own ignorance so that we have a clearer, sharper understanding of what the world around us is, not a world subordinated to our own proper interests. He's going to take us outside of the individual in a lot of respects.
Exactly. And why do we need to go there? It's very simple for Spinoza. He states this at the end of the appendix. He says, ignorance leads to conflict.
Yes.
Right? Each person judges things by the disposition of their own brain, body, and imagination. And as a result, I quote, "It is not surprising that there have arisen amongst men the many controversies that we experience, from which skepticism has finally arisen."
Oh, yes.
So not only do we have conflict, but because you and I disagree about the color of that wall and many other things, people think, well, human reason can't actually grasp the nature of reality.
No.
So not only are we fighting each other, but some people have given up completely and are skeptics.
Yeah, there's nothing. This is something I always found quite beautiful in Spinoza. He's really trying to work out what we have in common. What is the common ground that unites us, that is able to dispel this kind of veil of ignorance that surrounds us, how we're bound by our prejudices. And he's trying to think, what is the human being in common? By what mechanism can we find a common ground? What is the thing that unites us?
You know the answer, Val. You know the answer.
Is it? I swear, is it mathematics again?
It is. It's mathematics. And this is why he's going to employ, dear listeners, what he calls the geometrical method.
Yes.
And that's where we're going to start in the next episode.
Yes.
With those definitions and with those axioms.
We're going to go back to the beginning of book 1 and see what we can make of it now that we have this context wonderfully given to us by the appendix.
We're going to dive into the infinite.
Yes. And it's very big and it's very scary, but as long as we follow the geometric methods, I think we're going to find a way to navigate through it towards human freedom.
Absolutely. As always, it's been a great pleasure to have you all on board.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the feedback.
And look forward to reading more with you soon.
Absolutely.
See you later.